January 18th, 2025. Time is 15:07. Here with, introduce yourself.
My name is John Walker,
former
Senior Inspector of the United States Marshals.
All right.
Retired.
We will recover some of the ground we covered earlier today.
Okay.
Because I don't know which element will make the better audio. But how long? You're retired now after a 35-year career in law enforcement?
35 years. I was first a police officer for a number of years, and then I was a state investigator in Texas, and the last 26 I went to the US Marshals.
And we're sitting here at Dottie's, is this Parsons? We're in Parsons? Close to Parsons, Tennessee. And the reason we're sitting here is because you were actively involved in the Holly Bobo case investigation at the time and for months.
For approximately the first year and a half to 2 years.
And you were, as I recall, you were on scene within a few days of her disappearance, and you remained on the investigation for over a year?
Yes, correct.
All right. Your particular expertise is what in law enforcement?
Fugitives I did for quite some time, a number of years. And other duties as assigned. I spent 9 years on the Joint Terrorism Task Force out of Memphis, but mostly fugitives.
All right. And in looking for fugitives, people that are wanted by state and federal authorities, there are numerous investigatory techniques, obviously including increasingly technology, right?
Correct.
And did you develop during that time a specific skill set in technology,
Yes.
using technologies to apprehend?
Yes. I spent 7 years in the Eastern District of Texas as the warrant coordinator for the district. It covers 43 counties in Eastern Texas. And apprehending fugitives, we often use cell phone data, 2G cell phone data, to locate and apprehend individuals, and it's very similar to the Parsons, Tennessee area in the 2011 time.
Okay. Now, just how many fugitives do you think you participated in apprehending?
With cell phone technology or just all?
Generally?
Many.
Dozens, hundreds?
More, 100, thousands, many.
Okay.
Many. I don't know.
And in that time,
There was a number of them that were caught high profile. If they're very high profile, like rape, robbery, murder, we can use more electronic and more advanced things to find those individuals.
because the assets are scarce and they have to be applied to the right.
Yes, we try to use them right.
Try to allocate the assets in proportion to the seriousness of the
Exactly.
search. Okay. And I think you told me earlier today that you've testified in more trials than you can remember,
A number of trials, 7 capital murder trials.
including one that led to an execution.
Yes.
Okay. And so, fair to say that you were integrally involved in the Holly Bobo investigation at the time, and a fairly senior law enforcement officer on the collective team.
Correct.
And obviously qualified by training and experience to do that. What was your particular, I imagine that here we are 14 years later, I'll paint the picture, you tell me if I've got it wrong. A local girl is abducted from her driveway at 8 in the morning, and within hours, dozens of law enforcement officers representing multiple agencies are screaming to the scene to start the work to find her.
Correct.
And before long, there were dozens or more officers spending all or almost all of every day looking for her.
Yes.
You were one of them.
Yes.
You got here to the Parsons area within a few days of her disappearance because you were on some other...
I was in Minnesota at the time, but a few days later I was part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Me and my co-worker were sent here to work on the case.
because of your expertise.
To just do what we could.
Okay, so whoever had the authority to assign you to come down here and participate did that.
Yes.
All right. And when you got here, what role did you and your partner undertake to make your contribution to this investigation?
Initially, we did some initial searches based on some cell phone data. We were assigned leads on individuals that were suspects, and we investigated those. And part of the way into the investigation, let's say maybe a month into it, one of the supervisors of TBI, John Mayer, he noticed that we were looking at a lot of the cell data, because that's how we find people, from my experience with the marshals. And he noticed we were looking at the cell data a lot, and he asked us if we could map Holly's phone, because he wasn't getting results with what he had. He had some pings he didn't understand, he had some other information, but he asked if we could map it, and I said, yeah, but I needed certain machine or technology to get to that, assets to get to that point, and it took a time to get that point.
Okay, we're going to do a deep dive on that,
Okay.
but just to, I want people to be thoroughly convinced of your bona fides. Okay, you're not some crackpot that showed up here with a crazy theory.
No.
You were an active duty law enforcement officer.
And I want to be exactly very precise and accurate.
So if I get anything wrong, you make sure you let me know. But among other things, you interviewed central persons in this investigation.
Almost everyone.
Okay. At some point or another, you interviewed Clint Bobo more than once.
More than once?
Holly's brother.
Holly's brother.
And while we're on that subject, did you find him credible?
Yes. I've interviewed him probably 4 times, sometimes in excess of 3 hours. And his story's always been consistent. He seems very credible. He's not lying.
So if he's mistaken, it's not intentional. If there's anything he's wrong.
I haven't seen him be mistaken.
So you don't even know of anything he might have got wrong?
No, he has not. He's
Okay.
always been the same, and his testimony fits what occurred.
Okay, we're going to circle back to this because I want to try to keep this in chronological order because it's understandable that way. But at some point, you also interviewed Terry Britt, who for a long time was a suspect in this case.
Yeah, that was in 2013.
Okay, so we'll get to that after we build up
That's
to
toward the end of my participation in the investigation.
Okay, and by that time, you knew a lot of things that you didn't know early on.
Yes.
Factually, okay. Who else? Who were other persons of interest? Witness?
I interviewed Mr. Barnes, the next door neighbor.
Okay, and strange circumstance.
Yes.
Ran across him today.
Right.
Hadn't seen him in
12 years or more.
okay.
Since 2011 or 12. Yeah.
Mr. Barnes was necessarily considered as a possible suspect at least for a little while.
There were some people that were very focused on him, including the supervisor, John Mayer, but I interviewed him and I'm like, he's not that. The problem with him is he is with his girlfriend and child and calls his mother, and the timeline on him does not match Holly.
Okay, so just generally speaking, as a matter of just standard law enforcement practice, if a young girl goes missing from her home in broad daylight, you start with people who already know her.
Correct.
And work outwards.
Correct.
But at the same time, the story is and the facts are that Clint Bobo sees it. We'll let you.
The first thing we did was start focusing. We look at the family, you look at neighbors, and you look at friends.
Okay, you work outwards,
Yes.
concentric circles.
We focused a lot in the early couple of weeks on boyfriends, past boyfriends,
Okay,
current
and
past.
But we're going to get. I'm going to have you do some sketching and some explaining visually that we'll probably enhance with some technology later on. But one of the things I wanted to ask about was when Clint Bobo, and we'll skip parts of the story that are well known or whatever, but and then you can fill them in a minute. But Clint Bobo sees his sister being led away by a man he does not recognize, but he's able to describe. That's at about what time? April 13th, 2011.
What time does he see this?
Yes.
7:56.
Okay.
It's when he's walking across the backyard into the woods.
Okay. So at 7:56 a.m., April 13th, 2011, Clint Bobo, Holly's brother, sees her being led away by a man he doesn't know.
Correct.
Okay. And there's no vehicle attached to this. He doesn't see a vehicle.
Yeah.
He doesn't recognize the man. And so right off the bat, law enforcement is behind the 8 ball because they don't have a name, they don't have a vehicle,
We just
they
have
don't have,
we just have a description.
you don't have a motive. All you've got is an adult male with a description who leads this girl away, right? Because of that, among other things that happen, law enforcement's now scrambling to throw
Everything they can.
everything they can. And so by mid-afternoon, I think, law enforcement officers have been sent out to talk to persons in the community for no reason other than they're on the sex offender registry. And that one of those is Terry Britt. Okay. Maybe more on that later. All right. We went out earlier and sat for a minute in front of the home that the Bobos lived in at the time. And did you want to take us through the very first minutes of that situation?
Sure, I'm going to draw out that morning.
Okay, now, to be clear, you were not there, but what you're about to explain and the timeline you're about to give is drawn from...
It's based on Clint Bobo's testimony, Mr. Barnes' testimony, Mr. Barnes' mother's testimony, and the timeline of her cell phone.
Holly's cell phone.
Holly's cell phone.
Because to be clear and to not bury the lead, what you were eventually able to do after months of trial and error and investigatory work was you were able to conclusively take Holly Bobo's phone, the location of her phone, from her driveway at 7:56 a.m. to about 9:30 a.m. when it turns off after a long road, a long route that, and I'll let you explain the technology, but you know from this evidence that's forensic.
It's accurate.
That it's accurate. It doesn't depend upon the credibility of a human being. It depends upon science.
Yeah.
Okay? And you know...
It's trial and error to make it fit.
Right. And you were able to eventually crack this, and you can tell me positively on April 13th, 2011, Holly Bobo's phone at 7:56 a.m. is at her home, and then you're able to literally show which roads and roughly what time her phone made its way around the crime scenes, including, it turns out, to the place that her remains were later found 2 years later.
Correct.
Okay. So based upon what you're about to explain is the aggregation of all of the evidence from the interviews that you did and others, and the cell phone data that you personally worked on for months and months and months. Take it away.
Okay. I want to draw the Bobo residence, just here on the map. The driveway that comes down to the roadway. Here's a building out back. This is the wood line. It runs like this and around. There's wood line this way. The highway, the roadway comes this is Swan Johnson Road. Comes around. And there's a neighbor over here named Mr. Barnes that has a mobile home. His Ford pickup is parked here, facing that direction, it is up. So you got a general wood line out this way like this.
Where's the pond?
The pond is right in here.
And at the time, it's overgrown today, but at the time it was pretty well manicured.
This was a vacant field at the time. Across here, you can see all the way across pretty easily.
All right, because we're going to later do a zoom in on this, do some labeling, because you're describing it and I'm watching,
Okay.
but because we're going to use this itself. So the Bobo home,
Garage,
yeah,
pond.
and we know from interviews and the crime scene that Clint Bobo's car was in the garage.
Correct.
And incidentally, not usually in the garage,
Okay.
right?
Not usually. He put it in the garage because he had washed it and it was raining the day before. He didn't want to get messed
And
up.
I think someone mentioned to me that they also discovered reasons to believe that the family had recently cleaned it out and he could do that. Do you remember that?
Yeah, no, I don't remember that. I
Okay.
just know it was in the garage at the
All
time.
right. So
here's what happened. The individual that abducted Holly was over here in the woods.
hold on one second. The reason that Clint Bobo's car being in the garage makes some difference here is because all of the evidence suggests that whoever took her believed she was home alone.
Yeah,
Because
I'll explain that.
you'll get to that, okay.
I'll explain. So you had the individual in the woods watching the residence, and they probably started sometime around 7 or maybe just before 7, 6:45 to 7 o'clock. He believed he watched her mom leave the residence and go to work. Maybe he watched her dad leave the residence and go to work. He did not see Clint Bobo's vehicle, so he thought Holly was home by herself. And he had watched the residence long enough over the past week or so to know what time Holly leaves every morning. It is 2 weeks earlier than that. Holly and her cousin Natalie were out sunbathing, and they thought they heard something in the woods at that that time. So this person has probably been watching for a couple of weeks.
And this is according to Natalie, or did Holly report
According
it
to
at the
Natalie.
time?
Or Natalie.
Okay.
Anyway, this individual walks across underneath the carport as Holly comes out of her residence. Holly had a test that day. She'd gotten up early. She was studying. Clint Bobo was still sleeping. And at 7:45, she walks out the door to get in her car. I believe it was a Mustang, underneath the carport, to go to class. She has a nursing class. She has a test that day. So she walks out of the residence, and this individual grabs her, which I believe to be Terry Britt. They struggle for about 45 seconds. So that is according to the next door neighbor over here, Mr. Barnes. At this exact moment, Mr. Barnes is pouring a quart of oil into his F-150. And he hears...
Right, Barnes over here by trailer, please.
He is standing in front of his F-150, pouring a quart of oil into it, and he hears this screaming. He says he walks out to the edge of the woods and looks over across. He can't see Holly, but he hears her screaming. He says it goes for about 45 seconds. He says that she says things like, "Stop it, quit, stop it, don't, stop it." It sounds like she knew the guy but didn't know his name. She never screamed out a name. Okay? He says he gets in a huge rush because he hears this, and he forgets to put the oil cap on his valve cover and challenges to it, runs inside, gets his girlfriend and child, and gets in his vehicle. He then drives over in front of the Bobo residence, and this is about 7:46.
And that's where we sat.
That's what we
Earlier.
said, 7:46 a.m. At this same moment, Clint Bobo has been awakened. He says by the dogs. He might have been awakened by the dogs or Holly's screaming. Clint Bobo is looking out of the window onto the carport, and he sees his sister squatted down, facing some guy that he described as his cousin, because they look very similar to Terry Britt. So they're still squatted down facing each other, talking, and he thinks, initially he said, thinks it's her boyfriend, and they're having an argument, and he doesn't want to get involved in it. But he's kind of puzzled by it, so he tries to call his mother, and he doesn't quite make contact with his mother. At the same time, Mr. Barnes is down at the end of the driveway, looking up the driveway, doesn't see anything, and pulls away and calls his mother approximately 2 minutes later, about 7:48, 7:49, as he's driving away. Okay? Clint still's watching this. He continues to try to call his mother and gets through to her at 7:56. He's talking to her on the phone as Holly and this individual are walking across the yard back into the woods. At 7:56. He's discussing with his mother. He says, "Is Drew, Holly's boyfriend, with her? Something doesn't make any sense." And his mother says, "Something's going on with Holly. That's not supposed to be happening. Her boyfriend is miles away, turkey hunting. He is not there. There's something going wrong. You need to get the gun and go after your sister." So as he's walked away toward the vehicle out here, Mr. Barnes has already gone. It's 10 minutes earlier. He walks out toward the roadway. And
There's a logging road over
It's a
there.
logging road. It's an old logging road that runs through the woods. And he enters his vehicle, we believe, is parked over here by the road. The reason we didn't think Barnes saw it is because as he drove by, he's trying to call his mother and he's looking back over his shoulder toward the Bobo residence. So she's being walked to a vehicle parked out here at 8 o'clock. While Clint finds the gun and exits the house. As Holly's being driven away, Clint enters into the woods and looks for his sister. And as Miss Barnes' mother drives up in the driveway a few minutes after 8 o'clock, or 8:05, 8:10, she drives up the driveway. She witnesses Clint walking out of the woods with a gun in his hand in the front yard.
And this is 8 o'clock.
It's about 8:05.
8:05 at this point.
8 o'clock, the car leaves. He passes by about...
So interestingly enough, one thing that's curious is it appears that the assailant and Holly are in that carport for 8-10 minutes maybe.
Yeah, that's what I've always found unusual, because he first grabs her at 7:45 and is not walking away from her until 7:56. There's about 10 minutes there that I'm going, why are they having a conversation for 10 minutes?
To be clear, the reason that you can know the precision of the timing here is in part because of all these cell phone goes on.
Well, her cell phone's at her residence during this time.
But I'm talking about the
8 o'clock,
calls that are made by other people.
Other people, yeah.
So they're
I've looked at Clint's records, and his records match. Trying to call his
so
mother.
so does Barnes.
Barnes calling his mother.
And just to jump ahead a little bit, but before your investigation was done, you had pulled down hundreds of phones.
Yeah, every tower in the area, Verizon and AT&T, were downloaded, and I looked at every single phone to try to who was communicating with Holly, who would travel with Holly's route, all of them were looked at.
Okay.
Trying to find something that match even the route she took.
Okay, so,
Not only mapping Holly's, but any other body that would match.
all right, so by 5 after 8, Holly's
Holly's going north.
Holly's in a car with her phone and some other of her belongings, her book bag.
Yeah, she has with her, when she's walked off into the woods, we believe she has her purse with her lunchbox with her, and her notebook with her, and her nursing book with her. About 2 weeks into the investigation, I interviewed Clint Bobo in the parking lot of the Army where the investigation had moved to. He was there with his mother. His mother was talking to Terry Dykus, the lead agent, TBI agent, and I was talking to Clint Bobo, and I put him out in the parking lot, and I said, I need to know exactly what you saw. Give me a description of this individual you saw. And he said, he's about 5'11", about 200 pounds, he has shoulder length black hair, black baseball cap. He said he had barrel chest that looks like he used to work out, skinny legs like he used to work out and stop, skinny legs, boots, blue jeans and boots.
Does that description match,
Exactly.
hold on, does that description match Zach Adams?
No.
Does that description match Dylan Adams?
No.
Does that description match Jason Autry?
No,
Does that description match Shane Austin?
no,
Does it match Terry Brett?
exactly.
Okay,
And it matches the cousin he said it reminded him
okay. So, we've now got, sadly, Holly and her assailant in the car, and that's when what took you months to figure out that you told me about today, and we rode the route.
of. Rode the route.
Well, and
I didn't
so-
I didn't get the AT&T equipment until many months into the investigation. Then it probably took me about 3 months to trial and error drive the routes to figure out how it worked.
All right, let me see if I can develop from a non-expert's perspective how you were able to do what you were able to do, and then you tell me if I get any of this wrong. Every cell phone works by connecting to cell towers,
Correct.
and those towers and the phones are essentially working on radio signal.
Correct.
And so we've all had the experience of where you're driving along with your phone and it drops. And that frequently happens because you've driven out of the range
You're
of
between towers coverage.
you're between towers. And in Parsons, Tennessee at the time, it was 2G towers.
2G tower, correct.
And so Holly's phone and every other cell phone in the county was either, if it was being used or if it was on, it could or would be pinging to towers.
Well, a ping is different than
Okay,
a call registers on the tower. A ping is a signal sent to the tower out to the phone.
Okay, so I'll try to get the terminology right going forward. So, bottom line is, if you have the right expertise and the right equipment, and you're lucky enough to have a phone that's active, and if you're lucky enough to have law enforcement activating pings to try to light the phone up, you can use the phone's proximity to the towers to start to triangulate it.
Right.
So it won't tell you within 10 meters of where it is.
2G won't triangulate. 2G just gives you an area.
Okay, so explain, if you would, how, generically, how a person who needed to find a phone that was in an area in 2G coverage
Okay.
would do that.
First of all, let's talk about how cell towers are oriented in this area. They can have a north, south, east, west orientation. In this area, there's 4 main towers Holly communicated with. They're all north-oriented towers. And I'm going to draw you from an overall look-down view how a cell zone is covered.
And for what it's worth, Holly's phone was an AT&T phone.
It's an AT&T phone.
So you knew that right away.
Right.
Okay.
This is the way a cell tower looks when you're looking geographically down at it, how coverage is. This is the north. Let's say this is north facing this direction. And in AT&T towers, every agency's a little bit, company's a bit different. This is a 1 side, 2 side, 3 side on these towers. There are towers that are much more complex, have 8 sides on them, 9 sides. This is it's a real simple tower. So these are the sections 1, 2, and 3. And what you're going to have is this tower is going to have a number, a 4-digit number or 5-digit number, and the last number when you read a cell phone dump is the section that the tower's in. So when her phone communicates, it's going to say it's on this specific tower in this specific section. okay?
So it's gonna give you.
It's gonna be somewhere over here if it's in section 1.
All right, so, and those are 120-degree pie slices,
120 reply slice, yes.
okay? And does it also give you relative distance?
No, that is a different thing. Relative distance is done when the AT&T sends a signal to the towers to find a phone, it will ping it.
Okay,
And what that does is that will give you, based on the cell signal, a distance off of the tower. And when
But-
that distance is off of the tower, it will give you a dot somewhere, same distance off the tower, in an arc like this.
okay, so.
Somewhere in that
Do
zone.
you recall how many pings AT&T sent out to her
I
phone?
think there was 4 or 5.
Okay. You-
5.
So you're looking at the moment at,
5 I know of.
you're looking at at a record that you prepared at the time during the investigation?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So among other things, AT&T, acting on the request of law enforcement, started pinging her phone.
Yes.
And
they
those,
did.
and those pings helped you tremendously, I would think.
Later on.
Later on, when
that
you
day,
got all
that
of
day,
it.
I don't know if law enforcement understood how to look at a ping, although it was being done. But yes, it helped tremendously later on to map the phone.
That and the activity on her phone.
Yes, helps me map it out.
Okay.
Let me explain this further, how this works here.
Okay.
Okay, so in this area, Holly lives here, in the northwestern part of Decatur County. There's 4 towers it communicates with. There's one down here, called the Darden Tower. There's one up here, called the Shiloh Tower. There's one over here on Cox Road, called the Cox Tower. It's right here, and there's one down here, called the Parsons Tower. These are all AT&T towers, they're all north.
And they're literally aligned in a grid.
They're a little
More or
off,
less.
they're a little off, but they do to try to cover this area.
Well, and they put them on hills, and they put them
on
where they can
hills,
get
They
permission.
get permission to
But
try to
they're-
cover, make a cover.
But their plan is, to the extent they can, to grid.
Okay, and these cell towers have specific numbers that when you download Holly's phone, it's gonna show how it's communicating.
Okay.
And at 8 o'clock in the morning, she's communicating on side 1 of the Darden Tower.
Which at a minimum puts her in this 120-degree
It puts her
pie.
somewhere in here. Because what I had to do is this is the difficult part.
And the reason you know she's in this quadrant is because of the distance from the tower. The
Well,
signal
she
strength.
she has a 1. When she's registered, she's not only registering the Darden Tower, she's registered in section 1 of it.
Right,
Okay.
but you know that she's not, for example, way over here,
Right,
way
I
over
know
here
she-
because
I know-
of
I know.
signal strength.
Right. She is in this section.
Because if she were over here, she'd be getting off of this tower.
She would register on that tower.
And so part of what you did was painstakingly drive around with the right assets to be able to know when a phone identical to hers would flip from one tower to the other.
I'm gonna explain that
Okay.
part. I'm gonna explain how that works. Because this is something that's kind of was a marshal service kind of thing we do to find people. I'm gonna explain how that works. Okay.
And I don't want to be provocative, but there are things you know that you can't talk to me about right now.
I can cover this much. Let's
Okay.
just put it that way. Okay. AT&T has this machine, and what it does is it tells you where cell sections break at. For instance, and the machine has, we put 4 phones in this machine exactly like Holly's. Same wattage, same make and model in this machine. And I rode in the back with the AT&T tech, drove me around. And as you drive around, this machine puts colored dots on the roadway map. And each colored dot is a different color for each cell section. So say Darden 1 is light blue, and Parsons 3 is orange, and Shiloh Road is red, okay?
Someone who had extensive understanding of this science and technology, who had a reason to figure out how to use it for the good guys, put all this together. Right. Go ahead.
Right. So this machine, AT&T brought it over, and I spent more than half a day riding around the roads, mapping where these cell sections break at. For instance, I-40 runs up here, and I know the brake is in a specific spot when you drive by, because I rode in the back of the car, and when I would see the color change from one dot to another, like I know I was on, say, Shiloh Road Section 1, and I'm going to change to Cox Road Section 3, as I drive across headed east on I-40, I can sit there and watch, and when the color changes, I can mark that on the road. Okay, I can mark that on the road.
Okay.
And then I'll know that. And what I did was I found the break points between all these towers, where all these towers communicated and broke on the road.
Okay, on the roads.
On the road.
So y'all rode,
Yeah.
it's very, for people that have never been here, it's very sparsely populated.
Right.
And there are roads out there that you riding around on a road going, why'd they even build a road here at all? It doesn't seem to be going from
They're
anywhere.
country winding roads.
But you can go for miles and not see a house.
True.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, as I map her phone out, it becomes real clear real quick, because there's an 811 hit that's on
8:11 a.m.
8:11 a.m. that's on the Darden 1, and then there's about an 8:16, I have to look at the time exactly, on the Shiloh Road 2. So I know the phone changes cell zones.
Shiloh
Cell sections.
Section 2. So now you've
Section 2.
now you're starting to develop interlocking data.
Right. And when you find out real quickly that when you're driving these roadways and you know where the cell zones break at, that she couldn't have went east, because if you go just a little bit east over to Bible Hill Road, you're on the Parsons Tower. And that 811 or the 860 would have registered on the Parsons Tower. And I know she didn't go over here because there's a very powerful tower here called the Huma Tower, that it would have read on it. Or it would have read on the Darden number 3 tower. If you go, so you know that the phone travels straight north very quickly.
Now the tower obviously doesn't know where the road is, but
No.
the tower knows where the phone.
Well,
Roughly.
Well, the tower knows it's in a cell section because it's registered in
Right.
that cell section.
Okay.
Okay.
And then because the roads are, I guess what I'm getting at is, if, for example, you had applied the same technology to a large gridded city, it probably wouldn't have allowed you to do what you did here.
No, because there's too many routes of travel.
too many routes.
There's not there. You cannot. The problem is here that there's limited roads, and,
So it could-
and if you go off just a little bit one way or the other, you don't make the timeline between the 811 and 816.
So the one limitation of the technology and the expertise is, if hypothetically, we've been sitting here talking about trying to track a phone after the fact through a gridded city with high density, you couldn't have said what road she was on.
No,
But in this case,
probably not.
But in
I
this
could
case,
have gotten a general area, but a ping will tell me within a short distance based on, because what you do is you take this plus the pings overlap when the towers send a signal to it, communicate out.
it sounds like the
When you-
pings
when-
are significantly
when-
strong data.
Yeah, well, when you get a ping, what you'd have to do is you have to look at that and that arch on the tower I talked about, like this Darden. You have to look on the arch on the tower and find the roads that cross that. And when you find a road across, you go, oh, it could be this
And
one.
you
or it
know
could be
she
this
had to
one.
be there at this time.
One of those two spots where the pings cross.
This
so you line
very
pings up
spot.
on the roads in addition to her transitioning cell sections.
Okay, so you did countless hours and countless miles to cross-reference
It
and
took me
check.
several months to figure out exactly error-proof this driving. I mean, you know, it takes half an hour to drive from here to the freeway. And it takes more than half an hour to drive back. So you have to drive these numerous times with a stopwatch to figure out, how do I make this all line up?
And in the end,
Because if you
ruled
get off a
out-
little bit, it doesn't take much, you get off and the timeline's wrong.
So largely by process of trial and error and elimination, you arrived at the only possible route that her phone could have taken.
Yes, it's the only
Okay.
possible route.
And if someone else with your experience and the assets that you had and the data that you had came to a different conclusion, not that anyone ever did that, but you're saying they couldn't.
The issue is that the machine I know about that map cell sections, a lot of cell phone experts don't know about,
But I'm saying if a
including the
person,
ones that testified in the trial.
if a person had, okay. So if a person had exactly your skill set and the assets that you had at the time, you're confident or certain that they would come to exactly the same conclusion, because there is no other explanation that can square up and account for all of this data.
It's very possible. I don't know. I wouldn't 100% say somebody else's ability, but yes, it's been done.
Okay, well,
Can I explain to somebody they can replicate? Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody with some skill.
So, but I'm assuming a world in which someone with your same skill set
Yeah,
and
they could do
assets.
it. Yeah.
But you're telling me, I think, that person would inevitably come to exactly the same
They should.
conclusion.
Yes, they should.
Okay. So,
Because the timeline and where you're at in cell section has to line up.
all right, so this is extremely high-level application of skill and technology.
So what we get is a cell phone tower dump, and that's what this looks like right here. And this tells you the tower and the last number is the cell section it's on. And when you take that information, you can overlap that with the time.
Right. And you know that phone has to be here.
Yeah.
Because there's
You take
only
the-
one road that it could
Right,
be
you
on.
take the time and the cell section and the cell section, and you look at the cell section, you can figure out. It's like running around the base. You have to be at certain spots at certain times.
Right, so I want to skip forward to the conclusion and then we'll go backwards into the timeline. Ultimately, you concluded with certainty that Holly Bobo's phone left her home at a little after 8 a.m. and that it went off at a location certain at about 9:30.
By 9:30, based on the ping on the top of the tower.
But
Off the
before it
Parsons Road
went off and at a different location, it was still for about 25 minutes.
tower. Our phone leaves the residence at 8 o'clock. It gets up into the Shiloh Road Section 1 right at 8:30. It spends about 25 minutes in that section, the section where her remains were found.
Stop.
Okay.
The route that you've got, the map that we're looking at right now, her phone is not recovered with her remains.
No,
Her phone is recovered
later,
later. It cuts off at a different, well, it goes dark,
at 9:30 a.m.
but that's not where her phone is recovered either. It's recovered somewhere else.
Or near Parsons.
Okay, but based upon the data, her phone is stationary at this, within yard, within a,
It's stationary where her remains were found.
her phone is stationary proximate to where her remains were found.
Yes.
Okay.
The phone goes straight north. It gets into that cell section at about 8:30. It
Stays
there
there.
for 25 minutes. That's where her remains were found. And then it leaves that area. And it leaves that area between 8:56 and 9 o'clock. It's leaving that area because it transitions to another tower, the Cox Road Tower, which is north of the freeway. It transitions. And then it comes back across the freeway, and it registers on the Cox Road Tower, and this is an area to where many of her, it's like the abductor took her there, killed her, and still had stuff in his vehicle of hers. Because when he comes back across the freeway, he makes a left and he starts throwing things of her personal stuff.
One of which you recovered before you had
Well,
gotten to
I
the...
recovered down toward the creek. This is stuff, this is like receipts and pieces of paper and stuff out of her notebook.
Okay, so there's almost a breadcrumb trail,
Breadcrumb trail.
not only of her phone, but also of some of her belongings.
Yeah, yes, right. The breadcrumb trail runs down Yellow Springs Road and starts to turn south and then stops. But there's things out of her personal items, pieces of paper, receipts, I believe a dollar bill, are thrown out of the vehicle.
But your belief, based upon the investigation as a whole, is by that time she's dead.
Yes. She's
And-
been
and
left,
the- and whoever-
she's been left back in the,
Where she's, and so your belief is that she was in fact murdered
between,
where she was,
I
her
believe
remains
she
were
was
found.
murdered between 8:45 and 8:50 a.m. in that window.
And where her remains were found.
Her remains were found.
Okay, so there's been people that have speculated that her remains were placed there, or what, your belief is she was taken there straight from her home, killed there, left there, and that her belongings were then discarded on the flight
Yes.
by
and
the abductor
the
and
person
murderer.
driving away realized they still had the stuff in the vehicle,
So it starts going out the window.
so it starts going out. When he comes back across, makes a turn, he's headed home, starts throwing the stuff out.
And we rode that whole route.
Right.
And then, so certain things are found early on in the flight, and then there's a break before more things are found in the
The
route.
person continues south, and it's believed he still has her lunchbox, her notebook, and her nursing book still in the vehicle,
And her phone,
and her phone
active.
active.
Are there any pings on her phone after what the time of you believe her
There's
death?
two. There's two. One reads off the Cox Road Tower, which puts down, and there's one off the Parsons Tower.
Okay. Now, people listening to this are probably like, why don't you ask the obvious question right now? Okay, let me ask the obvious question right now. You were able to do this with Holly Bobo's phone.
Yeah.
Okay. Were you also able to do this with Terry Britt's phone?
Terry Britt did not have his phone on that morning. Either that or he did not get any calls. In order for it to register on the tower, you have to either get a call to it, a text message, something has to communicate with you, a ping, and
So his phone is dark during
his
this
phone is
period.
dark.
Wherever it was.
His phone doesn't show any activity till around noon.
Okay, so the answer is between 7:45 a.m. and noon, Terry Britt's phone does not reveal its location.
Correct.
Okay. Were you able to do this same analysis with?
I looked at every single phone on the AT&T and the Verizon towers in the area, and nobody's matched Holly's. One lady similarly matched it from going north to south, but that was the only one.
That was ruled out for other reasons.
Yes.
Okay, and so you didn't just look at names that were on the persons of interest list. You looked at every phone that connected.
Well, when I was doing this, Terry Britt wasn't a suspect at this time. He had not been a suspect this time.
Okay.
And I
So this investigation was not, what you were doing here was designed to solve the where did Holly's phone go question.
Where was Holly?
Right.
Where was Holly's remains? Where was Holly at? That's what this was done for.
All right. Now, so just to be painfully clear, none of neither Jason Autry, Dylan Adams, Zach Adams, or Shane Austin's phones are co-located with Holly's phone at any time during this
No,
morning.
they're not even active this time.
And
There-
when
there's nothing, their phones are not with this. They're not a part of this.
and are they active elsewhere at this time?
They were looked at, but nothing matches this with their phones.
Okay.
I know one of them was asleep during this, and one of them was at work during this, but there's no phones that are I think they registered around the Cox Road Tower at some point, but I'm not 100% sure because they're not on this. This is her phones goes from 8 o'clock to 9:30. It goes straight to the freeway. At about 8:30, it's there. It stays there until 9, and then she comes back south.
And because of all this geolocation and pinging and all that, you know where her phone was either separated from its battery or otherwise disabled from being on a tower.
Based on the timeline, when we go south this direction, the timeline lines up to where her lunchbox was found in a creek off of Gooch Road. It had a strap on it, large lunchbox, and when the person threw it out of the vehicle, it caught on a limb. It's a huge culvert. It's the only place you can get rid of those large items because there's houses and there's no place. It's the only place between the freeway. It's the first place to throw stuff out. Large culvert, probably 6-foot culvert, big creek. It had been raining before, a lot of water. Threw it over, got hung on a branch.
And that creek eventually would make its way to the Tennessee River.
Yes.
Okay, now,
And
you in fact found something down
I
that
believe
creek.
that to be the end of the route. I was in disagreement with some FBI agents about it. And I said, well, I'm gonna go down there and look, and I got permission from the case agent, Terry Dykes. I said, I'm gonna go down there and look and see what I can find. And I went down there, and within probably half an hour, I found her notebook, because it was washed down the creek and up into some branches. It was about 15 feet high in the branches, and it was about 75, 80 yards down the creek.
How do you know it's hers?
It said Holly on it, and it was black, and they identified it as Holly's
Okay, so
nursing notebook.
you didn't find a notebook, you found her
I
notebook.
found her notebook.
And the explanation is
It was
someone...
taken into evidence by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations.
Okay, so coincidentally, it
There's
sounds, a plausible theory here is,
There's also a ping off the Parsons Tower that matches, when you swing around, it matches that location. And the timeline from the freeway down, you in there at 9:30.
so every way you measure this, you're certain of this route, but you're also certain of where that phone, exactly when that phone went dark and where.
Yes.
Okay, now a plausible theory then is whoever abducted and killed Holly Bobo stopped on that bridge, that little bridge over the creek, and threw the notebook, the lunchbox, and did something to the phone to disable it.
Correct.
Okay,
That's
and
right.
and when we sat there for long enough for you to explain all this to me at the scene a little while ago, we were there 5 or 10 minutes and saw one car come.
Yeah. I don't know. How many, we might have passed one car going north and one south. I believe it wasn't many.
I was shocked at how sparsely populated and lightly traveled this
road-
entire
the
route
route
was.
The route north passes the fewest houses, intentionally passes the fewest.
Is it your belief that Terry Britt planned this?
Yes, Terry Britt knows all these roads very well. A friend of his named Skip Boney, I interviewed. He says they spent weekends riding around, drinking beer, driving all of these roads. They used to hang out underneath this bridge up here by where her remains were found on weekends and drink beer. After she was abducted and killed, he no longer did that. He fits the physical description exactly, and he lives at the end of the route.
Well, okay, there's a lot of reasons to think he did it, but in this, my specific question here is, based upon what your investigation and your experience, do you believe that Terry Britt first planned this, including where he would take her to
Yes,
kill
of
her,
course.
and how he would get there?
I think he spent a couple of weeks figuring this out because he had to case the residents to realize when the mom will leave, the dad will leave, and what the brother will,
And where to put a car,
and where to put a car.
because
how to
their
get up there to-
driveway is pretty long and open.
How to get up there to the house. Yes, you have to plot this out. It has to be somebody that really has probably been in trouble before for the similar kind of thing.
Well, there's a million moments where someone who thought maybe I'll do this could have abandoned this plan. This was a sustained attention plan.
Yes. The
And-
only errors he made is Clint Bobo was home and saw him, and the lunchbox hung on a limb at the end of the route. Outside of that, there's no errors. There's nobody that saw him. There's people that say things, but I don't know how accurate some of that is.
You attended the trial.
I was a witness in the trial for the defense.
So were you allowed to sit through the prosecution's case in chief
No.
because of the rule of sequestration?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you subsequently watched Jason Autry's testimony?
I've seen sketchy parts of it. It is a complete fabrication.
It cannot be reconciled. Jason Autry's so-called confession and implication of Dylan
No,
and...
well, one thing about it remains.
Well, hold on. Let me get the yes or no, and
Okay.
then I want you to explain why.
Okay.
Jason Autry's explanation of Holly Bobo's last day cannot be reconciled with this data.
Correct.
Okay, why?
Cannot. Well, they give some very foggy testimony that starts around 10 o'clock or something when their cell phones are active, and they give some sketchy, foggy testimony about how her cell phone traveled down to the river, which is about 8 miles away. There is no time for that phone to travel 8 miles away down to the river and then back and then do this Parsons ping on the third side of the tower.
And it turns
You
out
cannot do that.
it
time.
turns out too that that Zach Adams' phone is also not there.
The problem is her phone during this window, no, it's not there. It sits in this cell section of section 1 of Shallow Road Tower for 25 minutes and then moves across. There's no time that you can do. You can barely make this drive south, intentionally going south. You can't go to the river and back and then down south and make the timeline.
Can't be done.
Can't be done.
And it didn't happen.
It did not happen. And not only that, he said for 8 months while they had him in jail with this story that he abducted and killed Holly because he'd been threatened, is that her remains were thrown in the river for a long time. He said it for 8 months, but when her remains were found, he changed the story like, oh, we drove her back and dumped her out there.
Okay, so kidnapping, raping, murderers lie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Did you go interview Terry Britt?
Yes, I did.
What did
Jail.
Terry? By the time you
Terry
interviewed,
Dykes asked me to go talk to Britt in jail to see if he wanted to work out some kind of deal because they were talking about charging his wife Janet.
okay. But when did you go talk to Terry Britt?
Spring of 2013.
By that time, had you developed this timeline and this
Yes,
route?
yes.
So you knew for sure all the things we've just discussed,
There was a number of things that pointed to him.
and he was a person of interest.
He was the person.
And the lead agent sent you to go talk to him.
Right.
Okay. Tell me about that conversation. Where was he? He
Well,
was in
I
jail
was doing
somewhere.
this out of, because I knew Terry Dykes, and I was like, I'll do him a favor. And I fully expected him to be the typical incarcerated individual, typical sociopath, and just lie to me.
Well, by this time, I mean, you're saying that
and so I was kind of like caught by
you
surprise.
knew very well that Terry Britt had been in prison many times.
Yeah.
and had spent a long time in prison.
For abduction and rape.
Had extensive exposure to law enforcement.
Spent most of his life in prison at the age of 50.
Okay, so you thought, this is sort of a wild goose chase, he's gonna tell me, thanks for coming,
Yeah,
go away.
Yeah, go away.
What happened?
Well, I went in and I treated him like a person, honestly. I just was straightforward with him. I said, you know who I am, because he knew who I was, because I printed him before. And I said, I've been sitting here to talk to you. I'm going to tell you what we know. And he said, I said, wait a minute, I know you're a sociopath, and I know you have a problem with women. Let's just get past it. I know why you went on Holly. She's very pretty. I understand. And I said, I'm not here to judge you. I said, I'm not recording any of it. I just want to tell you what we know, and TBI wants to know if you want to work some deal out. That's all. And I told him what we knew. I said, we got your physical description from the brother. He saw you that morning, and he says stuff like, well, that boy don't know what he saw. And then I go into the details. I said, your phone tracks north to the freeway to where her remains weren't found at that time. Your rain tracks north to the freeway, where you used to hang out and drink beer, then you throw the stuff out coming home, and you dump the stuff out in Goose Creek Road before you go home. And I explained to him what we knew. And he looks at me real seriously and goes, it sounds like you've got it figured out. I'll plead to 20 years. And he goes, and I said, wait a minute. Then he goes, I'd like to be in a jail with, he said, I don't want to die in prison, but I'd like to be in a jail with older people. These younger crowd around here are kind of rowdy and noisy, and I'd like to be in an older, but I'll plead to 20. You can close the case.
So you go confront him with what you know,
Yeah.
and he basically folds.
Yeah, and he says, as I said, and I went on further. I said, wait a minute, you can't just, we have to have the body. And he looks at me with a strange look and says, I can't give you what I don't have. And I'm like, I didn't realize what that meant till later. That means he's been back to the location. And then when I get up to leave, I said, TBI needs to come interview you, and he wants to show me, he wants to tell me the remains are. He said, if you can get me out of here, I can show you something. And I turned the report over to TBI. Because it wasn't my responsibility to get a confession from him. That's not my case. All I was there to see if he wanted to work out a deal, and he was on board for it.
So somebody else would have presumably gone and followed up and closed this deal.
Somebody with TBI. I did not know what politically was going on inside TV at the time. I just was doing a favor.
As we now know, that's not what happened next.
It did not happen.
Eventually, the investigation comes completely off of Terry Britt. And there's,
Yeah, sure.
I've interviewed people who've told me that were in the investigation that basically the higher-ups came in and said, shut down that investigation of Terry Britt. He's not our man. Go figure out another story.
They had his house bugged for a couple of weeks, and it was fully expected to listen in and hear him confessing and talking about this murder with his wife, and that didn't happen. And it kind of took the air out of
But he
him.
did say sketchy things like,
he
did say
yeah.
things like,
Yeah.
hey, don't talk. I know they probably got me bugged.
Yeah, he did say some things. But
He did say, he was asked by somebody, hey, somebody asked him about, did they get your boots? Because law enforcement had been out to collect things. And he said, no, they didn't get my boots. I tore them up there in the back or something. So somebody that asked him about his boots.
yeah. Then he even said to his wife at one point, well, you know I wouldn't do something like that, but she's probably thinking he may be involved.
But his
So that's-
alibi was her.
Well, she states that she woke up that morning around 9:45 when he drove up when the dogs were barking. That was one of her very first statements.
But later,
Later, they developed an alibi.
Okay.
That said,
so there's a whole, we'll run down that rabbit hole in a minute. At the trial, you were not allowed to participate or to even watch because of the rules of sequestration of witnesses.
Correct.
You eventually testified for the defense.
yeah.
Because by that time, you and other senior members of the investigatory team had either left or been pushed out of this investigation
an FBI agent and the main case agent.
because you guys were convinced it was Terry Britt and you were being told go get someone else.
Yes. That's
shocking to someone, particularly someone like me who's been a defense lawyer for so long. Of all the things I've seen,
Like I said, we didn't get him confessing on the wiretap, and a lot of people didn't have any concept of the case, what had happened, and how much effort had been put into by the three individuals, mainly the FBI agent and Terry Dykus with TBI. Didn't have any concept or clue, and the investigation shifted to blaming Clint Bobo, that Clint Bobo was
and
lying.
some drug theory.
Well, the first one was that he was having a relationship with an underage girl, and Holly was going to tell his mother, and so he had these guys kill Holly because of that. And then it turned into he was going to learn how to cook meth, which is complete, utter nonsense.
Okay. So at the trial, my understanding is that what you were allowed to say, again because of the court's rulings, was so far short of what you've just explained to me, it's not even recognizable.
Yeah, the issue is that I would not claim I'm a cell phone expert because that is a very, very vast thing for my agency. It is very comprehensive. But I am a cell phone expert in 2G towers. I would say that. If I would have been asked that, I can explain 2G towers. But the prosecution knew what I knew, and because I had to meet with her a year before the trial, and I told her everything I knew, including the hair evidence, and she found a way to make sure that I didn't get my testimony in. She knew about my map.
Because it seems to me like anybody hearing about this, at a minimum, would not convict Zach Adams.
Because I made a map of this, a large-scale map that I had in early 2012, and I reminded TBI about it.
In writing.
In writing, with documentation, in writing, when the remains were found, and I said, this is Brady material because I have to bring this up because y'all are putting somebody in jail when there is a map in that file with my name on it and my information that says something very different, and I don't want to be accused at a later time of hiding Brady material.
So you felt like
So I said I was required by law to speak up, and when I did, they filed an internal affairs complaint for only one in 35 years. My fellow agency I'm trying to help, filed a complaint on it.
Brady material is...
Brady material is something that law enforcement agencies have that shows that the person accused could be innocent and they're required to.
It's exculpatory material,
Exactly.
and law enforcement prosecution is required to provide that to the defense.
Yes, I'm required to. Regardless of what my agency or my supervisor, anybody's, I have to present that material.
And your concern at the time was, I got to make sure, I got to basically flap my arms and shout loud enough that they all remember, hey, y'all are running down this.
If they convict innocent people and later on they're found out not innocent, they go back and look at things that weren't out there and they can say, well, why didn't you say so?
Like right now. What do you think ought to happen next? I want to try to draw this to a conclusion. I mean, I appreciate your time, but this does not rest easy on you.
I don't know if the state would grant people a new trial. They're very, very hard to do that. It would take an extraordinary person to grant them a new trial, because the state's going to do everything they can prevent that. Because if you have a recanted testimony, and if he does get on the stand and say something different, a recantation is all made up, which it was, and he says they threatened me to do this, it turns it into a whole other animal, and if they're granted a new trial, they have no evidence. There is zero evidence convicting these guys other than a wild tale that was made up. There is no DNA evidence, there's nothing.
And Terry Britt, by the way, not currently in prison.
No. But there's one more thing I want to talk about Terry Britt, is that when the FBI searched his residence, in a van, they found hair around the rope. Blonde hair that was tested at the FBI lab, that microscopically colored, macroscopically matched Holly's hair. They took it off of a hairbrush in her home off of her brush. Those are compared to the FBI lab. I sat on the conversation with Art, the FBI agent, Terry Dicus, the TBI agent, and myself, and the lady wanted to pursue to indictment at that moment. And Dicus was cautious. He says, let's get the DNA back and see what it says. Well, the DNA came back like 3 weeks later. It's mitochondrial DNA, and they said it didn't match.
Well, it was inconclusive.
Well, it's inconclusive.
It's neither a positive exclusion nor positive inclusion.
And what happens is everybody went, oh, that's not her because the DNA don't match. And then I found out later through a friend of mine who happened to be supervised by the person that worked at the Human Genome Project out of Columbia University, that mitochondrial DNA often doesn't match. It is inclusive when it does match, but it does not exclude, and that's why they take numerous hair samples off your head when they're working with mitochondrial DNA. It often doesn't match. So it is her hair, and
in his van.
In his van.
And that is known to law enforcement before the trial.
Yeah. Yes. And it microscopically matches, and it's same color.
We went out to where
twins' hair don't match. So let's get that clear.
We went out to where Holly's remains were found today, and I was watching you, And I asked you, what's the sense that you have standing here? You'd never been there
No, I've never been there
until today.
till today.
Tell the people listening what it's like to have put so much time and energy into this case,
It's
and
disheartening.
and to know in your heart,
Yeah, it's
for
very
all the
disheartening.
right reasons, that the wrong men are in prison.
It's disheartening. You look back at what we could have done differently.
But
I feel like it failed.
so your heart doesn't rest easy on it where it is
No,
now.
that's the reason this stuff is in my mind 14 or 13 years later. I can still know it like it's ingrained. Same thing with Art and same thing with Terry Dykes. It's there.
You're members of a club no one wanted to be in.
We wanted to find this girl, hopefully alive, for her family. And there's a point to realize that's probably not going to happen. But you want them to get closure.
And the
you
right guy to go to prison.
and the right guy to go to prison, and they harassed Clint Bobo, and they shouldn't have done that. 'Cause I never ever felt he was not credible. He was always telling the truth. And to attack him when he lost his sister is completely wrong.
The neighbor got raked over
That's
the coals.
completely wrong. Because they did. They accused him for a long time. His story, his timeline. All you got to do is look at the evidence. Look at the timeline with the phones, what they said. It matches. It's accurate. And I spent numerous hours with Clint Bobo, and he's not dishonest. He even said in trial, "That's not the person that took my sister."
Well, we're going to keep working on this, and I hope that one day you can be there when justice is done. Thank you for your time today.